MrBeast is very well known for spending a ton of money on his videos, and nowadays he is spending a couple million at the minimum for a single video. And on top of this, he is constantly giving away money in other people's videos, and he also does a ton of charity work, and on the outside, it seems like he has an infinite amount of money. But how exactly is he able to afford all of these different things while also being able to enjoy some really nice things himself? Well, that's what we'll be going over today, so let's get right into it. The first and most obvious income stream is from ad revenue, and he has made around $4.7 million in ad revenue from his main channel in the last month. And when you go ahead and factor in all of his other channels, he is making a little over $5 million a month from ad revenue alone. However, this number can fluctuate a bit depending on when he uploads the videos and how well those videos do. So on average, I would say the monthly ad revenue is probably a bit higher, especially considering that MrBeast is in the YouTube Select program that gives him better ad rates for his videos. So I would say this definitely makes him the highest earning YouTuber on the platform outside of the major media companies and news outlets. However, despite all of this, it actually isn't a lot of money for MrBeast when you look at all of his expenses, and it probably doesn't even cover production costs like paying for his employees and all the logistics behind his videos. And I would actually say it makes up around 10 to 15% of his total monthly income. And this is where some of his other sources come into play, with another major source being brand deals. Nearly all of his videos have a brand deal, and he often works with a ton of different brands for his videos, which is something you have seen pretty recently. And something really interesting that MrBeast mentioned with brand deals is that a lot of companies can't truly afford to sponsor a video because of just how many views MrBeast gets. And if we go with the standard rate of $20 per 1,000 views, then that number is somewhere between $2 and $3 million per video. This is really a crazy amount of money, and it helps explain why MrBeast sometimes struggles to get sponsors for his videos, since that is literally like the entire marketing budget for some companies. And that is also probably why he works with a bunch of different companies, since they can only afford to sponsor him once a quarter or once a year or something. But anyways, if we just assume that every video is sponsored, then he's probably making about $4 to $6 million a month from brand deals alone, since he uploads twice a month, and this basically matches the ad revenue. So if we are being generous, then he would be making about $10 million a month from ad revenue and sponsorships combined. However, not every video is sponsored, and this is why MrBeast would need other sources of revenue, since he couldn't rely on sponsorships. Plus, they still wouldn't cover all his expenses even when combined with the ad revenue. And because of this, MrBeast would end up needing other sources of revenue, and one of the first major sources would be merch. And back in the day, he promoted his merch a ton, and he would even do live streams just to promote this merch, and you could see just tons and tons of pieces in a warehouse. And during these streams, I'm sure he made upwards of millions of dollars, and he was a lot smaller than he is now. And I do know that there was some controversy around these streams when it came to the giveaway nature of them and the whole lottery aspect, but overall, I don't think it was a really big deal, but it could be a part of the reason he doesn't do these streams anymore. But even despite that, he still does promote his merch, and I'm sure he still makes at least $2 to $3 million a month from his merch alone, and possibly even more with special pieces like the Beast Games stuff. And speaking of Beast Games, this is something that MrBeast said he lost tens of millions of dollars on, and so far we have seen that the current revenue sources would not have been able to make up for all of these expenses. However, at this point, we can see how he is able to pay for the videos themselves, since I think about $12 million a month would be enough for one or two of his videos depending on what they are. For example, I think a lot of his videos could be done for $5 million. However, there are some that would go way over that, especially the videos where he gives away money, because that is a massive cost on top of all the production. And then you also have to consider his philanthropy channel, in which he is spending millions of dollars helping others. So this is why he needs even more sources of income, and this is why he has started his own companies, with the biggest example being Feastables, which is a 10-figure company that generates tens of millions of dollars a month, and I would say this is his biggest source of revenue by far, and what has really allowed him to fund all the big things he does, and that is why he promotes it in pretty much every single piece of content he makes. But before we talk more about Feastables, I quickly want to mention Beast Burger, since that was his first kind of company and it was like where he really started expanding and scaling up business. This was his first real business, and it is what gave him the knowledge and experience to create Feastables. However, as for Beast Burger, it is going through a really tough period with there being disagreements about how the business is run, since MrBeast doesn't like the inconsistent quality, and that is why he doesn't talk about it anymore. However, it still exists and is generating money. However, I don't think it is a significant amount worth considering. Instead, Feastables is worth talking about since it has truly become a massive brand, and it has been growing like crazy and is one of the biggest creator companies that exists, with it being worth over $1 billion, and it is also what really helps make MrBeast a billionaire on paper when combined with his channel and brand as a whole. Overall, Feastables brings in tens of millions of dollars a month, and they are estimated to make over $500 million this year, with a lot of room for growth in the future. And this by far is their biggest source of revenue. However, you have to realize that revenue doesn't equal profit, and for chocolate bars, the margin isn't exactly the greatest, especially with how things have been recently. First of all, MrBeast is making sure his chocolate bars are being made ethically and that everyone is getting paid a fair wage, so that automatically makes things more expensive and reduces his margins. Plus, we have recently seen a bunch of stuff going on with tariffs, and MrBeast himself has said that things have gotten harder for the company with the price increases, as that lowers margins even more on an already fairly low margin product. However, he did say that he would figure it out, so that is a good thing, but I thought it was important to consider since it definitely does affect his margins and his profits. But in the end, I believe Feastables will pull through and it will grow big enough to be one of the biggest chocolate brands in the world, and it will probably be MrBeast's biggest company unless he can come out with something even bigger. However, he does have other active companies right now, with another food-based one being Lunchly, and this is one that was very controversial when it was announced. However, it seems to be doing alright, and I believe this will also be another very big brand. It is still a little early to really understand how much money they make. However, I think we can safely say it is at least 7 figures a month. And this is something that is kind of like a collaboration with Prime and Feastables, since those two products are included inside of each Lunchly, and those brands are each worth over $1 billion. So I think Lunchly has the same potential. And then on top of this, he also has a software company called ViewStats, which is like a YouTube tool, and it does have a paid subscription model. There isn't really any way to know how many people have the subscription and how much money they make. However, the thing to note about this company is that the margins are a lot higher since it is software and not a physical product. It still does have expenses when it comes to running the tool and developing it. However, the margins are still way better than any of his physical companies, and this is a nice extra source of revenue for him. However, it isn't close to what Lunchly or Feastables is doing, but I thought it was important to mention anyways. And then finally, the last major source of money is actually from funding, since MrBeast has gotten hundreds of millions of dollars in outside funding for his overall brand, and this includes things like his companies and his videos. This is really what makes it seem like he has infinite money, since he kind of does with massive investment like this. It is what allows him to do these massive projects, since he doesn't get all the money right away from his videos and stuff, as they generate money over time, and it isn't like instant, so getting funding helps him have cash on hand to spend while he generates more from his videos over time, along with the rest of his businesses. And right now, he is raising money at a valuation of $5 billion for his entire brand, which is just a crazy number and crazy to think about considering where he was just a few years ago. Also, I'm sure he has personal investments like real estate and stocks and stuff, but we're gonna leave those out since they would just be pure speculation. But overall, we can see how he makes tens of millions of dollars a month, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's had months where he has made close to 70 or 80 million dollars, and I don't think a $100 million month is out of the question either. However, you still have to consider expenses and everything, and I would say that he most likely makes less than $1 million a month in profit for the business, as he is always reinvesting his money to grow even bigger and do bigger things and help more people, and it does seem to be paying off as his brand is growing bigger and bigger, and I think Beast Games was a really good example of that. But that's also it for this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next one.